Welcome to Still Evolving, where we explore the truth behind lasting performance and resilience. Rather than rely on perfection or superhuman ability, our conversation will highlight how real strength emerges through simple, intentional habits grounded in self-compassion, adaptability, and the ability to grow through life's inevitable setbacks. Today's guest is Brad Burgess. Brad is a seasoned reputation management advisor and skilled communicator. He has over 2 decades of experience protecting as well as promoting brands and business leaders' reputations across several industries with a particular focus on China. Brad also has helped take companies public on the NYSE and the Nasdaq. He is fluent and literate in Chinese and offers a highly nuanced understanding of diversity and culture. Please welcome Brad to Still Evolving. Brad, welcome to Still Evolving. Grateful to have you here today and really look forward to our conversation.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to join.
Could we start off? I'm really curious just to hearing on your journey, where you've been, what you're up to now, and the highlights that you feel like could be really relevant and powerful in between.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So my journey is a bit of a long journey, starting in Michigan and ending here in Pennsylvania most recently. But my journey took me around to the other side of the world for over half my lifetime, most recently to return. And what happened was when I was younger, I had a great passion in languages and cultures and things of that nature. And I studied a couple of books about China and I read some really interesting material before China was really cool or popular, and maybe it's not so cool now, like geopolitically and all that with a lot of people. But at the time, it was before the rise of China in the bigger sense of the term economically, and it was really just on the cusp of what people were starting to pay attention to. I came from a very small town. I had no resources in terms of who could teach me Chinese, actually very, very little Asian community at all. Most of the people there were second generation Mexicans. And so we grew up with a lot of those, which was great. But in terms of Asian community, we didn't have it. And so I waited until I went to university and I joined this very small program to study Chinese and East Asian, culture. And I went abroad to Beijing back in 1999 and experienced China. And I got a small taste in my mouth. And I thought it was very interesting, very different than what I had studied and expected. And I kind of felt like I needed more. And so I went back again in the early 2000s. And I ended up staying there much longer than I had planned or expected. I didn't make a plan or a grand vision about what I should do, but it just seemed like a really unique time of history where China was beginning to attract a wide range of really interesting people. And so it was this culmination of the Chinese culture itself was interesting. It was on the bank of a really unprecedented time of history in terms of a nation's development, and it attracted people from around the world. So you hear about like Prague back in the 1920s or Paris or something like that, and how it just sort of attracts the intellectuals or the artists or the creatives or what have you. And that's kind of how it was back then. It was just this really, really interesting, almost like wild, wild east kind of place.
Mhm.
And so I stayed and I studied more and I ended up getting work. And I myself developed my career in the same manner that a Chinese did at that time. And so I really developed my trajectory of my life and my work was very similar to a young Chinese person's at that time. And it was still quite
Wow.
unique. There still weren't that many Americans doing that. Certainly, I was in Beijing for 15 years and I ended up, living in Shanghai for 8. And so it was still quite new, especially in
Mhm.
Beijing. There were
Mhm.
diplomats, there were some creative types, et cetera, but it wasn't really that large of a community. So there's a lot of opportunity for people like me, and especially for people who are willing to put in the time. Because I
Mhm.
think what's interesting in China is that it's a tough business culture, especially. It's a really, really different culture from the US. I mean, naturally, it's on the other side of the world. So it's going to be different. But people are people. And as people, we share certain desires, we share certain interests, and et cetera. So you can make a lot of friends, but the ways of doing things are really, really different. And you've really got to put your time in to understand it and to listen carefully and to be humble and kind of invest. And so I think for the most part, a lot of people who were living there at the time would stay a few years and go. They get a taste of it. They like it. They stay a few years and go. But I ended up just sticking around and I got a really, really different experience over there than most people who are not from China. I would say Asia. Most Westerners get when they stick around. So I got a very, very unique experience. I ended up choosing a career in public affairs and communications. And so it evolved into reputation management, where in a nutshell, I help brands and leaders to promote and protect their reputation. And
Okay.
so there's a whole suite of services around that in terms of how to do that. But what I ended up doing was the first half of my career was representing multinationals and also multinational governments to target that part of the world in terms of handling their reputation. In the latter half of my career, I started working more with Asia headquartered companies, in particular China headquartered companies doing that very same kind of thing. And
Okay.
so it's been a pretty good ride, and I'm still doing that work. I just do it now from the East Coast of the US instead of China. So I go back and forth a lot, but that's what I've done in a nutshell. I think I've been able to carve a unique space because I was willing to put in the time. I was willing to invest and be patient. And those things really pay off a lot
Yeah.
in China. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be gifted, I don't think, as a person if you possess the patience, the stamina, the endurance, the humility, and the willingness to learn. Those really pay off in the end.
I have so many questions and different directions we could go. I'm curious, especially in your line of work, when you're helping brands or other leaders in their reputation, either protecting it or navigating through challenges with that. You talked about in China, it was a different way of doing business or perhaps different way of handling maybe those challenges. What lessons learned or what have you taken away from that experience in the culture that has helped us and maybe could help us that we haven't been exposed to that different way, especially with regards to navigating challenge or adversity? What did you find interesting or really you've adapted or embraced yourself as a leader?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's always a lot of challenges. I think it's understanding where your influence is and
Hmm.
where it's not, and don't waste time where your influence is not, because there's always a lot of opportunities with Chinese business and Chinese companies. And so it can often be very hard to understand what's going to move forward, what's going to be taken seriously. And you can end up spinning your wheels a lot. You can end up wasting your time a lot on what look like very good opportunities. So what you need to do is you spend a lot of time, you need to express enthusiasm in an opportunity, and you need to spend a lot of time qualifying the opportunity. You need to ask a lot of questions. You
Hmm.
need to make sure that you understand are the decision makers involved in the process? Because China is a very different culture than the West in a sense that there is what I can't remember who coined this, but there is a lot of power distance between the decision makers and the executors in a team. And
Okay.
so here in the US, we really value engagement from leaders
Hmm.
to staff. We
Hmm.
expect engagement.
Right.
We expect our leaders to be accessible, right?
Yeah.
That's not expected in China. In fact, in fact, if leadership is too accessible or too, human, people actually don't necessarily like it. They want to feel like our leader understands what he's doing. He can be tough, and that's fine as long as he provide or she provides clear direction on what we're doing. It's fine. You don't need to engage. You don't need to explain too much. So in the West, we're expecting explanation. We're expecting context. We're expecting to be engaged as part of the process. Well, that's a very Western experience. So in China, you need to qualify what's going on a lot more, and you need to make sure that all opportunities are going to be real. And the best way to do that is by asking a lot of questions and getting to the heart of the matter and making sure that the decision makers are involved in the process as well. So this stuff takes a lot of time. You can
Yeah.
jump through a
I
lot
can
of hoops.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Americans oftentimes simply give up because there's enough business coming from other markets. There's enough business coming from the US. And we're a very contract based culture,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I believe is true, which is a Judeo-Christian experience, right? And so the concept of a contract is very much based on Judeo-Christian values, is my understanding of, here's the commitment,
Hmm.
here's what we're going to do. We sign on the dotted line, and it's going to happen. That's not really an Eastern experience, and
Okay.
so that also relates to the importance of personality and personal relationships. as it regards influence. So, can you influence the process when you qualify the opportunity by understanding the whole picture and making sure that the decision maker is involved in the process and not just kind of passing the work over to somebody to execute? They need to be involved, and you need to make sure that they're in the room with you. And then also the personal element, because contracts are, I would say, they're still honored in China. The
Okay.
Chinese businesses actually honor contracts. Now, I don't know how transparent I should be on some of this stuff because it might offend, some people, but I've had some very bad experiences with other countries in Asia
Okay.
for not honoring contracts, one in
Okay.
particular, and it was really, really bad, And so it almost makes you want to say, we're not going to do business with that nation.
Mm-hmm.
China, for the most part, honors their contracts, but it's the process by which you go through the contract negotiation. It's very, very difficult. It's extremely difficult. And price is always the number one concern. So it's a
Okay.
price, what would you call price war? We're in a
Mm-hmm.
price war time right now. And
Yeah.
so there's that. But going back to the point I was making, contracts as a concept are quite Western in nature, or maybe I don't know exactly where they're from, but it's from that ethical background, the
Mm-hmm.
Judeo-Christian ethical background. And so in China, if you're able to help the person personally, it helps. And so it's
Okay.
it's kind of a bit more creative nature to the business. And so is there a way that you can help this person through your own experience or expertise or network
Mm-hmm.
or what have you? And so that kind of thinking, I think, really, really helps out as well.
Yeah.
Because what's interesting, there's a lot of bureaucracy in China, which can
Mm-hmm.
be very, very frustrating,
Mm-hmm.
but the people are delightful. And so how does that happen?
Right.
How is it, honestly, how is it that I would say almost every Chinese person I engage is delightful? They're great people,
Yeah.
but they're caught in this like bureaucracy of stuff that can sometimes, and especially the government, they're caught in this bureaucracy of stuff that is just like it's out of their hands, or it's caught up and they can't move it forward, or things like that. That's a really, really interesting dynamic. Is the people are delightful to work with, but oftentimes the system itself can create hoops and hoops and hoops and just delay stuff and make it really difficult.
I'm curious, Brad. I mean, I hear really the agent of change is the relationships, right? It's not based in perhaps, as you described, the contracts. There's certainly the price war, but really the power lies in the connectivity, your openness to learning, certainly your
Mm.
grit and hanging in there and continuing to evolve through it. What were some of your takeaways as a leader not coming from the East, being the Westerner and learning about the culture? What helped you in that process to form the closeness in those relationships? I hear just the individual people were delightful and you connected well, but was there anything that helped you in terms of gaining acceptance or a sense of belonging
Yeah.
within the culture, given that you are from the West?
Yeah, no question, knowing how to speak Chinese. Absolutely no question. So China's interesting where the East Coast is where all of the commerce and things. Well, the West Coast also there's much going on, but if you look at the country itself from Beijing down to Guangzhou in Hong Kong, this is where the largest cities in commerce and culture are located. It's a huge country. The Eastern Strip is where most people live, especially Westerners. There's very few that are living inland. And and those people, those Chinese people, for the most part, speak English. At least the people who you're encountering in the professional world speak pretty good English. And a lot of people, they want to speak English. They actually want to practice English. And so that can be a good or bad thing. I think it's a great thing when you're moving to China with no understanding of Chinese because it's
Hmm.
very easy to get around. You go to Shanghai in particular, it's mind-blowingly easy and convenient to get around.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you've been there, but
I haven't. No.
it really is world class. Now, for somebody who's actually wanting to move to China to get the China experience, it's terrible. I didn't like that at all because I wanted to be a part of the local Chinese community and experience.
Hmm.
And so I have invested over 20 years in learning how to read and write and speak Chinese. And that has really paid off, I think, in general, because people are, even if they want to practice English, even if they want to defer to English, they're like, wow, this guy really, he respects us enough to put in the time. He
Right.
understands us enough. That really goes a long way. I mean, I'll make it, I'll tell you honestly, I'll go to, I'll say, do you have a bottle of water or hello? And people respond, say, your Chinese is awesome. I'll say, hello, hello. And they
Wow.
say, your Chinese is awesome. How sad. In a
Yeah.
sense, how sad
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
because Shanghai as a city historically has had a very, very large population of people from around the world for over 100 years. It was divided up in certain pockets and territories by the Americans, the Germans, the French, etc. But those people never really integrated into China historically. So what has happened is over the course of over a century, there is still this legacy of we don't need to do Chinese. And there's also an expectation from the Chinese that they don't need to do it. That's just the way it is. That's the way it's always been. So I kind of bucked the system from day one, and I have always been bucking that system. And I
Yeah.
think it created some serious personal dissension for years because we all want to be included. We all want to be included, right? And so we'll be in a meeting room, for example, and everybody's speaking Chinese, and then they turn to me and they switch to English. And I'll have to say, hey, you don't need to do that, or it's unnecessary, or whatever. And then over time, people just get it, and then they include you. They include you, but it's so rare for them to be working with somebody who can communicate in their own language without hiccups. But I was such a firm believer in the necessity of doing that, but it came from curiosity and it came from interest. It didn't come
Yeah.
from a business need. And I think that's a key difference. So understanding Chinese will take you really, really far, both for the people who even speak English, because they feel like you're respecting them. And then I think
Yes.
also, I just do things in Chinese with a lot of Chinese who don't speak English. And so that's opened a lot of opportunities that would not be available to me as a Westerner if I didn't speak Chinese. So I would say like half of the business opportunities would be impossible if I didn't speak Chinese.
If you didn't speak Chinese.
So I think that is absolutely critical. The
Right.
challenge is when you learn Chinese and you're in China, you need to work through that internal dissension of your desire to be accepted on their terms because you won't be. You're a foreigner and you will always be a foreigner. And there's nothing you can do about that. It's not an American melting pot where people come here and they're expected to speak English and people proactively speak English. Over there, people speak English to you proactively. It's totally different. So it's
Right.
almost like you're bucking the system for years and years and years and years, but there's a payoff in the end.
Absolutely.
But it can be very exhausting. Those first 10 years are very exhausting because you're doing things totally different. But then there's a payoff that I've discovered.
Absolutely. Brad, just to, I guess what comes to my mind, and I relate on my own journey, certainly not at an international experience, but within our own profession of performance psychology, sports performance psychology, I'll commonly say, like, I'm not your stereotypical psychologist. And what I mean by that is we talk a lot, especially in sport. I played a lot of sports as a kid growing up, but when I got into the profession, I never played football. I didn't run track. I didn't throw. So we talked about the value of being present and not feeling the need to do anything but learn and be curious
Right.
and
Yeah.
learn the language. Obviously not a foreign language, but in many ways, understanding the experience of that performer within that performance domain, understanding that nomenclature so that I can connect. And to your point, I was the only woman in a room of 100 and some men for a football program.
I can
I
imagine.
will never be truly on that inside, right? To your point, a foreigner. And yet, how can I adapt or adopt the language, the understanding, the flow of the culture such that I can gain trust and form stronger working relationships to support the mission that we were pursuing? So again, different, but that's kind of what came to my mind as you were talking as a leader, someone supporting a team, how important that belonging is, but the amount of time it takes for that connection to really evolve and the specific strategies or tools that people can use to further that progress, right? Like being curious, being open, and putting the work in that, it's not the sexy, like wine and dine. It's the night, maybe a Saturday night, you're watching a show in Chinese, right? And
Right.
trying to learn. So thank you for sharing on that. I'm curious in your role now, you're back here in the States, but yet still supporting many back in China. I'm curious, you talk about traveling a good bit. We talk with leaders about this is a marathon, right? Our careers, it's a grind now, especially with the international travel, perhaps amping up a good bit. What are you doing to sustain that for yourself individually as a leader? It's not your only role in your life. You have a family, friends, others. How do you kind of fuel the resilience, if you will?
In terms of travel? like
Or
managing
just
travel.
all that you're managing, right? It could
Yeah,
be the
yeah,
load that comes from travel. It could also be the load that you're pulled in many
yeah,
directions in your
yeah.
life.
Well, I think it's definitely my relationship with Jesus Christ because all of those challenges that I talked about in terms of the internal dissension, in terms of the need to be patient, in terms of the need to listen carefully, in terms of the need to bounce back and buck the system and all of those things comes from what I believe is an inner strength. And that inner strength comes from my faith. And it's my faith in Christ. And it is what I believe is called the Holy Spirit, which is essentially it's a counselor and it is a kind of wisdom which helps you to navigate very big challenges, right? So it's calling upon the faith that I have. It's calling upon the Holy Spirit. And it's not this vacuous kind of strange ghosty thing. It's more about listening to your heart. And so what is it inside my heart that is speaking right now so that I can be wise in the moment that's before me? Because there's a lot of stuff that we can do to prepare. We
Hmm.
prepare for meetings, this interview.
Sure.
How do I prepare? So it's a lot of things you do to prepare well so that you can be having a great experience. But sometimes in the moment, you're faced with a big challenge that you don't know how to address. And so you listen to your heart, which is the spirit within you. It gives you wisdom of the moment. And
Hmm.
so this is how I interpret that. And this is what a reflection of the faith that I have in Christ and in the Holy Spirit. And I think that also allows me to love better.
Hmm.
So if you look at what the definition of love is in the Bible, it's love is patient, love is kind, it is not self-seeking. And there's a very, very important one here. It does not remember the wrongs in the past. Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
that's huge. It's huge.
Sure.
How do you live your life so that you can really let people off the hook? You let
Hmm.
people off the hook and you love them in that way, which sometimes can be very, very challenging. So it's a
Absolutely. Yeah.
process. It's a process of continually trying to be patient,
Mm.
be kind, to think of the other person, to not insist on your own way, and to forget the past. And I really do think that this is core to resilience, and it's been very,
Mhm.
very helpful to me, personally.
That's incredibly powerful. Jim Lauer back, this is probably early 2000s. I'd have to go back and pull it. He wrote an article in the HBR and talked about the corporate athlete. And he provided a pyramid of the foundation of physical, and then, of course, the mental and the emotional, perhaps rituals that help us stay grounded. But the top there, he highlighted the power of the spiritual. And we talked a lot in our conversation today about the value and the strength and how much comes from relationships and the connectivity that we have with others. And certainly there's that self connection as well. Can you talked about the inner dialogue, the processes you were working through. But I really appreciate you also highlighting and sharing very personally the connection to a higher power,
Mhm.
something bigger than ourselves, and it
Yeah.
manifests for you through your faith. I don't know in high performance if we always talk about that enough. The power of connection, yes, it comes from all of us in the present human beings around us, but certainly we have so much data and research around whatever that is for you personally. Some people it's the Christian faith. Some people, it may be connecting with nature and
Mm.
being able to get outside.
Right.
Right. It may manifest differently, but nonetheless, the connection to something higher than yourself is so powerful.
Yeah.
So thank you
Yeah.
for sharing
Yeah,
on
sure.
that.
Well, thanks for letting me share about that very
Yeah.
personal
Very, very powerful.
experience. Yeah.
If we can wrap up, we always leave our audience with an immediate actionable takeaway, something that maybe you find in your daily, weekly routine that helps ground you. And it may be what you just shared a bit on your connectivity and your faith. But if there was something else, also feel free to share that immediate actionable takeaway that people might give a shot and help
Yeah.
in their grind.
Yeah. So I've learned a new word which my brother taught me. Ambivert. I didn't know this word. There's extrovert, introvert, ambivert. I'm not sure your perspective on these, but
No, go ahead.
I've always been curious about which one I am. Am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? He's like, no, you're an ambivert. I'm an extrovert. And I looked up the word and I was like, well, you're right. I enjoy being with people and I enjoy being around people, but I also get a lot of energy from being alone. And I think that to me was very interesting. How does that play out? Well, I'm with people all the time. And I've got a very, very extroverted young daughter, and I've got a very introverted older daughter. And and they're best friends. They're best friends. But there's also major fights all the time because of these personality differences, right?
Right.
And so I'm playing coach a lot at home. And I think what's really important to me is when they're back in school and my wife is working, you know, can I get some time? Can I get some downtime just to sort of energize, like some my time, because there's so very little of that during the week. It's such a busy, busy life, especially at this age, to take care of young kids and to do a career and support your wife in her career and all that, that I think it's really essential to get what it could be called a Sabbath. It doesn't have to be. And it might not necessarily be a Friday. It might be a Monday or Wednesday or whatever, but it's time that you can just take to chill out and rest. I think that's really essential. And I found that that really helps me over the years. And I think in particular, these most recent couple years, because it's really busy with young kids and doing
Yes.
career, and managing all those pieces. You've got to get
Yeah.
some time to yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that long, but make sure
Right.
you get it on a consistent basis. Yeah.
Appreciate you sharing that, Brad. Thank you. And thank you for this conversation. Like I said earlier, I could kick this with you and would love learning from you. And so hopefully we can continue this.
Yeah. Thank
But
you.
thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.